The golden throne room of Pharaoh Khaemwaset falls silent as a young girl stumbles through the massive doors, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. Palace guards move to stop her, but something in her desperate eyes halts them. She collapses before the divine ruler, gasping words that will change everything. "If I rest, my mama dies." The girl's mother lies dying in their humble village, kept alive only by her daughter's constant care, carrying water, grinding medicine, never stopping even as her own strength fades. The pharaoh, known throughout Egypt for his divine detachment from mortal concerns, rises from his throne. His next words shock the entire court. "Don't worry, I will save you both." But what could drive the most powerful ruler in the ancient world to personally intervene for two unknown peasants? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days earlier, in the village of Kemenu, nestled between rolling sand dunes and the life-giving Nile, a mother's labored breathing filled a small mud-brick hut. Kia lay on a simple reed mat, her once vibrant face now pale as papyrus, her body burning with fever that no village remedy could break. Beside her, 10-year-old Naya ground herbs with a stone pestle, her small hands working tirelessly as they had for 7 days and nights without rest. "Mama, drink this," Naya whispered, lifting her mother's head to help her sip the bitter medicine. Kia's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with illness, but she managed a weak smile for her devoted daughter. The village healer, old Seneb, shook his graying head as he observed from the doorway. "Child, your mother needs medicine beyond what we possess here. The fever comes from deep within, and our simple herbs cannot reach it." Naya's worn leather sandals, cracked from months of running between the well and her mother's bedside, caught the morning light streaming through the small window. Those same sandals had carried her countless miles, to the river for water, to neighboring huts, begging for rare ingredients, to the temple seeking the gods' intervention through prayer. "There must be something," Naya insisted, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I cannot let her die." Seneb knelt beside the girl who had become the village's example of devotion. "The royal physicians in Memphis, they possess knowledge and medicines we do not. But child, even if such help existed for people like us, Memphis lies 3 days' journey through the desert." "Then I will go to Memphis," Naya declared, with the fierce determination of a child who had already sacrificed everything for love. The village elder, Kenti, entered the hut with several concerned neighbors. His weathered face showed the skepticism of a man who had seen too many desperate plans fail. "Naya, even if you survived the desert journey, the palace guards would never allow a peasant child to approach the divine pharaoh. It is forbidden by sacred law." But Naya had already made her decision. She gathered her mother's precious silver bracelet, their only valuable possession, and wrapped it carefully in a piece of clean linen. "This will pay for food and water during the journey." "The pharaoh is not a man like us," Kenti continued gently. "He is divine, chosen by the gods to rule. He does not concern himself with the troubles of common people." Kia stirred, her fevered eyes finding her daughter's face. With tremendous effort, she reached out to touch Naya's cheek. "My brave girl," she whispered, if the gods will it, go. But promise me, if I am meant to join the ancestors, you will not blame yourself." "No, Mama, you will live. I will make sure of it." That evening, as the desert wind carried the scent of distant storms, Naya prepared for her impossible journey. She filled a small gourd with water, packed flatbread that would last 3 days if she ate sparingly, and kissed her unconscious mother's burning forehead. The village women gathered silently as Naya stepped into the cool night air. They had watched this child transform from carefree girl to devoted caregiver, never once complaining about the burden she carried. Now they witnessed her final act of love, a journey that might cost her life. "The desert is dangerous for a child alone," warned Nebet, the baker's wife. "Wild animals, sandstorms, thieves who prey on travelers. My mother will die if I stay, Naya replied simply. She might live if I go. There is no Under the stars that had guided travelers for thousands of years, Naya began walking north toward Memphis, toward the golden palace of the pharaoh, toward a hope so desperate it bordered on madness. Her worn sandals whispered against the sand as she disappeared into the vast darkness, carrying nothing but determination and a love so fierce it would soon shake the very foundations of divine protocol. Behind her, Kia's breathing grew shallow with each passing hour, her life ebbing away like water spilling from a cracked vessel. In the distance, a young girl's silhouette grew smaller against the endless desert, racing time itself to save the one person who mattered more than life itself. The throne room erupted in whispered chaos as courtiers struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. High Priest Amenhotep stepped forward, his ornate robes rustling with indignation, clutching the sacred papyrus of royal protocols, the ancient document that governed every aspect of divine behavior. Your divine majesty, Amenhotep's voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Surely you cannot mean to personally involve yourself in the affairs of common peasants. The sacred texts clearly state that the pharaoh, blessed by Ra himself, must maintain divine separation from mortal concerns. Pharaoh Khaemwaset remained standing beside his golden throne, his hands still gripping the royal Ankh scepter with unusual intensity. The young girl lay collapsed at his feet, unconscious from exhaustion and the overwhelming relief of finally reaching her destination. Her small chest rose and fell rapidly, like a bird that had flown beyond its endurance. The sacred texts, Khaemwaset replied slowly, his voice carrying an authority that made the vast chamber fall silent, speak of divine responsibility to protect all subjects under Ra's dominion. Does this child not fall under that protection? Queen Nefertari, observing from her smaller throne beside her husband, allowed the faintest smile to cross her lips. In 30 years of marriage, she had watched Khaemwaset grow increasingly isolated within the rigid protocols of divine kingship. This moment represented something she had hoped to see for years, her husband remembering his humanity beneath the weight of godhood. The court vizier, Hemiuna, approached with careful steps. Great Pharaoh, consider the precedent such action would create. If word spreads that you personally respond to every peasant's plea, the palace will be overrun with desperate supplicants. The machinery of government would cease to function. And if I ignore this child's courage and devotion, Khaemwaset countered, what does that say about the divine compassion I am supposed to embody? Amenhotep unrolled the ancient papyrus, its hieroglyphs gleaming in the torchlight. The protocol of divine conduct, established by your ancestor Ramesses the Great, specifically forbids the pharaoh from leaving the palace for personal missions. The gods blessed you with divine status, precisely to remain above such earthly concern. The pharaoh descended from his throne, kneeling beside the unconscious girl. Her worn sandals told a story of desperate determination, cracked leather that had carried her impossible distances, soles worn thin by rocks and sand, straps mended multiple times with rough cord. In those simple sandals, Khaemwaset saw more nobility than in all the golden ornaments surrounding him. 37 years I have ruled from this throne, he said softly, his words carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. 37 years of receiving reports about my people's suffering, of making decisions about their lives from behind these golden walls. When did divine authority become an excuse for divine indifference? The queen rose gracefully and approached her husband. My lord, she said, her voice pitched for his ears alone, I have watched you grow troubled by the isolation our position demands. Perhaps this child has brought you an opportunity to remember why the gods chose you to lead. Amenhotep's face flushed with barely contained frustration. Your Majesty, the established order has maintained Egypt's prosperity for generations. Personal involvement in individual cases undermines the divine mystique, essential to effective rule. The divine mystique, Khaemwaset repeated, still gazing at the sleeping child. Tell me, Amenhotep, when did the gods become mysterious rather than merciful? When did divine power become more important than divine compassion? A younger priest, Khaemwaset, stepped forward hesitantly. Great Pharaoh, perhaps there is precedent in the ancient story. Did not Horus himself walk among mortals when justice demanded it? Amenhotep shot the young priest a withering glare, but Khaemwaset nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, the gods themselves were not too proud to involve themselves directly when circumstances required it. The pharaoh stood, his decision crystallizing with each passing moment. The royal Ankh scepter in his hand seemed to pulse with new purpose, as if the ancient symbol of life itself approved of his choice. "I will go to this child's village," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone wall. "I will attempt to save her mother, and if my actions shock those who prefer their role as distant and untouchable, so be it." The court fell into stunned silence. Never in living memory had a pharaoh made such a declaration. Even Queen Nefertari, despite her subtle encouragement, felt the magnitude of her husband's decision settle over the chamber, like desert sand after a windstorm. Dawn had not yet broken when Pharaoh Khaemwaset summoned his chief physician, Imhotep the Younger, to the palace's medical chambers. The ancient room housed Egypt's most precious medical knowledge, scrolls dating back centuries, each one representing accumulated wisdom about healing arts that common village healers could never access. "Tell me about fevers that resist traditional remedies," the pharaoh commanded, his urgency evident in the early hour of their meeting. Imhotep, elderly but sharp-minded, spread the healing scroll of Thoth across a marble table. The papyrus contained detailed illustrations of medicinal plants, preparation methods, and treatment protocols developed over generations of royal medical practice. "Divine Pharaoh, there are several conditions that present as persistent fever. Without examining the patient, I can only prepare a comprehensive selection of medicines." "Then prepare everything," Khaemwaset ordered. "We travel to the village today." The physician's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he immediately began gathering supplies: sacred healing oils from Punt, rare minerals from Nubian mines, preserved herbs that cost more than most peasants earned in a year. All were packed carefully into portable medicine chests, designed for royal travel. In the royal quarters, Queen Nefertari helped her husband select appropriate attire for his unprecedented journey. Gone were the elaborate ceremonial robes and golden ornaments of divine authority. Instead, she laid out simple linen garments that would protect him from desert heat, while allowing him to move freely. "The court will not easily accept this decision," Nefertari observed, fastening a plain leather belt around her husband's waist. Amenhotep spent half the night consulting with other priests, no doubt planning ways to prevent your departure. "Let them plan," Khaemwaset replied, accepting a simple bronze dagger for protection. "I have spent too many years listening to advisors tell me why I cannot act on my own conscience." Young Naya had been given quarters in the servants' wing, where palace women tended to her exhaustion and dehydration. When the pharaoh visited her that morning, she was sitting up in bed, eating honey cakes with the desperate hunger of someone who had survived on scraps for days. "Your Majesty," she whispered, attempting to rise despite her weakness. "Rest, child," he said gently, sitting on a simple stool beside her bed. "I need you to tell me about your mother's condition. Every detail may help my physicians help her." Naya's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and renewed hope. "She burns with fever, but also shivers with cold. Her skin is dry like papyrus, and she cannot keep water in her stomach. The village healer says her spirit is fighting to stay, but her body grows weaker each day." Khaemwaset listened intently, filing away each symptom. "How long has she been ill?" 12 days now. It started after she helped birth the baker's wife's baby during a difficult night. She was strong that morning, but by evening she could barely stand." The pharaoh exchanged meaningful glances with Imhotep. "Childbed fever," the physician murmured. "It spreads sometimes to those who assist in difficult births. We have treatments, but they must be administered quickly." As the morning progressed, Word of the pharaoh's planned journey spread through the palace like flooding Nile waters. Servants whispered in corridors, guards exchanged worried looks, and noble courtiers gathered in small groups to discuss this unprecedented break from protocol. High Priest Amenhotep made one final attempt to dissuade his ruler, arriving at the departure courtyard with a scroll of religious objections. Great Pharaoh, the gods speak through established customs. To abandon divine protocol is to risk their displeasure. Khaemwaset finished securing supplies to a simple wooden cart, chosen deliberately over the ornate royal chariots that would have marked their procession as divine. Amenhotep, tell me, which god would be displeased by mercy? Which deity demands that I ignore a child's courage and a mother's suffering? The priest fell silent, unable to argue against compassion without appearing heartless. Captain Khaemwaset, the pharaoh's most trusted guard, approached with a small retinue of soldiers. Your Majesty, we are prepared to escort you safely to the village. No soldiers, Khaemwaset decided. We travel as healers, not conquerors. You, Imhotep, myself, and the girl to guide us. Nothing more. As the sun climbed higher, the unlikely procession departed through the palace's service gates. The divine pharaoh of Egypt, abandoning his golden throne room, following a peasant child across the desert to save a woman he had never met. Behind them the palace hummed with uncertainty and whispered predictions of either magnificent compassion or dangerous precedent. The simple wooden cart creaked as it rolled through Memphis streets, its humble appearance concealing medicines worth a kingdom's ransom and carrying a ruler whose decision would echo through history. The desert wind stirred sand across the ancient trade route as the simple wooden cart rolled steadily southward, its wheels worn smooth from countless journeys. Pharaoh Khaemwaset walked alongside the modest vehicle, having abandoned the comfortable cushions within to experience the journey as his subjects would. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, painting the endless dunes in shifting shades of gold and amber. Captain Khaemwaset rode slightly ahead, his trained eyes scanning for potential dangers, though his heart remained heavy with concern for his ruler's safety. Never in his 20 years of service had he escorted the pharaoh beyond palace walls without the full ceremony of royal procession, golden chariots, trumpeters, banners, and 100 armed guards to ensure divine dignity. Naya sat in the cart beside physician Imhotep, her young eyes constantly searching the horizon ahead for familiar landmarks. Her anxiety was visible in the way her small hands clutched the cart's wooden sides, knowing that each hour of delay might mean her mother's life slipping further away. How much further to your village, child? Khaemwaset asked, his voice already showing strain from the desert heat. By midday tomorrow, if we maintain this pace, Your Majesty, Naya replied, then hesitated before adding, My lord, you need not walk. The cart can carry you. The pharaoh smiled at her concern. I have spent too many years being carried while my subjects walked. Perhaps it is time I understood their burden. Imhotep observed his ruler with growing amazement. In all his years serving the royal household, he had never witnessed such humble behavior from divine authority. The pharaoh's simple linen clothes were already dusty from the road, his expensive sandals showing the first signs of wear from desert travel. As the sun reached its zenith, they encountered their first fellow travelers, a family of traders returning from southern markets with their camels laden with ivory and precious stones. The merchants approached with the usual deference shown to anyone traveling with obvious wealth, but their expressions changed to confusion when they recognized the quality of the cart's simple construction. Peace upon your journey, travelers, called the lead merchant, an elderly man with sun-weathered skin and intelligent eyes, and upon yours, Khaemwaset replied, making no mention of his identity. The merchant studied their small party with growing curiosity. You carry the bearing of nobility, yet travel with simple means. Are you perhaps scholars on research expedition? We are healers, the pharaoh answered truthfully, traveling to aid someone in need. Healers, the merchant nodded approvingly. A noble profession. The gods smile upon those who ease suffering. He gestured toward his own caravan, We carry some medical supplies from Nubian traders. If you have need, you are welcome to share our evening meal and examine our goods. Khaemwaset felt something unfamiliar stir within him, the simple pleasure of being accepted for his actions rather than his status. We would be honored. As evening approached, both groups made camp beside a small oasis, where date palms provided blessed shade and a natural spring offered fresh water. The merchant family shared their food generously, flatbread, dried fruits and goat cheese that tasted remarkably flavorful after a day of desert travel. "Your young companion seems troubled," observed the merchant's wife, noticing Naya's anxious silence during their meal. "Her mother lies ill," Khaemwaset explained gently. "We race against time to bring healing." The woman's expression softened with maternal understanding. "The desert tests us all, but the gods reward those who persevere in love." She reached into her traveling pack and withdrew a small clay water gourd, its surface decorated with protective symbols. "This belonged to my grandmother, who traveled these routes for 70 years. May it bring blessing to your mission." Naya accepted the gift with tears of gratitude, understanding that such generosity from strangers represented kindness beyond price. As the desert stars emerged in spectacular abundance, Khaemwaset lay beside their small fire, listening to night sounds he had never experienced from his palace chambers. Sand whispered across dunes, distant jackals called to their packs, and the gentle breathing of sleeping companions created a symphony of simple peace. "Your Majesty," Imhotep whispered quietly, "how do you find this journey compared to royal procession?" The pharaoh considered the question while studying stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I am discovering that true majesty may lie in purposes worth pursuing rather than ceremonies worth displaying." The water gourd rested beside Naya's sleeping form, its simple clay surface catching starlight like a sacred vessel, carrying hopes across the vast desert toward a mother whose life hung in the balance of divine compassion, meeting human need. The second day's journey began before dawn, when desert air still carried the coolness of night. Pharaoh Khaemwaset woke to unfamiliar aches in his legs and shoulders, the honest pain of physical exertion that palace life had never demanded. His water gourd, a simple clay vessel that had become precious through necessity, sat beside his sleeping mat, half empty from the night's rationed sips. "Your Majesty," Captain Khamherb approached with concern evident in his weathered face, "perhaps today you might ride in the cart. The sun will be merciless, and we face the most difficult terrain ahead." Khaemwaset stood slowly, testing his stiff muscles against the day's demands. "If I cannot endure what my subjects endure daily, how can I claim to understand their needs?" Naya was already awake, her young face tense with worry as she calculated time and distance. "My lord, we must reach the village before sunset tomorrow." Or she could not voice her fear that they might arrive too late. As they resumed their journey, the landscape grew harsher. Rocky outcroppings jutted from sand like broken teeth, and the cartwheels struggled against increasingly rough terrain. The simple wooden vehicle, chosen for its humble appearance, proved its worth through sturdy construction that absorbed the worst impacts without complaint. By mid-morning, the desert heat had become oppressive. Khaemwaset discovered the torment of genuine thirst, not the mild discomfort of delayed refreshment he had occasionally experienced in the palace, but the deep bodily need that made every drop of water precious beyond gold. "Drink sparingly but regularly," Naya advised, watching the pharaoh struggle with water discipline. "The desert punishes those who drink too much too quickly, but also those who wait too long between sips." Her guidance amazed him. This child, who had collapsed from exhaustion in his throne room just days ago, possessed survival knowledge that his royal education had never included. She read wind patterns, recognized dangerous terrain, and managed their precious water supply with expertise earned through necessity. As the sun reached its brutal peak, they encountered a group of nomadic herders driving goats toward distant pastures. The herders, their faces wrapped against blowing sand, approached with the cautious hospitality that desert dwellers extended to fellow travelers. Water offered their leader, an elderly woman whose eyes held the wisdom of countless desert crossings. "We have found good spring nearby." Khaemwaset accepted gratefully, realizing that his royal identity meant nothing to people who measured worth through survival skills and generosity of spirit. To these nomads, he was simply another traveler, struggling against the desert's challenges. "You go to southern villages?" the woman asked, studying their modest party. "To help someone in need," Naya replied simply. The herder woman nodded approvingly. "Desert teaches us that all life is precious. Those who risk themselves for others earn the gods' protection." She shared not only water, but knowledge. Warnings about sandstorms building to the east, directions to safer paths through rocky terrain, and the location of another spring should their supply run low. Most valuable of all, she offered flatbread and dried dates that would sustain them through the day's remaining heat.
"Why do you help strangers?"
Khaemwaset asked, genuinely curious about generosity that expected no reward. "Because strangers helped us when we needed it," she replied matter-of-factly. "Desert survival depends on shared kindness. Those who hoard while others suffer soon find themselves alone when trouble comes." As they prepared to continue their journey, the woman pressed a small leather pouch into Naya's hands. "Healing herbs. My grandmother gathered them from sacred places. Maybe they help your mission." That afternoon, as they struggled through a particularly difficult stretch of broken ground, Khaemwaset reflected on lessons the desert was teaching him. Every comfortable assumption about leadership, every certainty about divine authority, was being tested against practical realities of shared hardship and mutual dependence. "Naya," he said during a brief rest in whatever shade the cart could provide, "how did you learn to survive in conditions like these?" "By watching my mother," she replied simply. "She taught me that strength comes not from avoiding hardship, but from helping others through it." As evening approached, they made camp beside a cluster of rocks that provided minimal shelter from the constant wind. The water gourd, now more than half empty, represented life itself in this harsh environment. Khaemwaset understood for the first time why ancient texts spoke of water as sacred, not through poetic metaphor, but through desert truth. The village of Khaemeno appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon heat, its mud brick huts clustered around life-giving wells that had sustained the community for generations. Palm trees provided blessed shade over small gardens, where vegetables grew in careful rows, tended by hands that understood the precious nature of every drop of water in this harsh landscape. Naya's pace quickened as familiar sights filled her reason. "There, my lord, the hut with the red door, that is our home." But as their modest procession entered the village, an extraordinary thing occurred. Children playing in the dusty pathways stopped their games and stared. Women carrying water jars froze mid-step. Men working in small fields dropped their tools and gaped in amazement. Word spread faster than desert wind. Strangers approached, and one of them carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of great authority. Village elder Kenti emerged from the largest hut, his aged eyes widening as he took in the sight. The simple wooden cart, the travel-worn but obviously fine clothing, the physician's medical supplies, and most shocking of all, the man whose presence seemed to command respect from the very air around him. "Great Lord," Kenti stammered, falling to his knees in the dust. "Forgive our poor village for receiving such distinguished visitors without proper preparation. We are humble farmers, unworthy of—" "Rise, friend," Khaemwaset interrupted gently. "We come not as conquerors, seeking tribute, but as healers hoping to help. Where is the woman called Kia?" Naya was already running toward the hut with the red door, her heart pounding with desperate hope and terrible fear. She burst through the entrance and fell to her knees beside her mother's sleeping mat. Kia lay motionless, her breathing so shallow it barely stirred the thin cloth covering her chest. Her skin had taken on the waxy pallor that village healers recognized as the approach of death. "Mama," Naya whispered urgently, "Mama, I brought help. The greatest physicians in Egypt have come to heal you." Kia's eyes fluttered open with tremendous effort. Her lips moved soundlessly at first, then managed the faintest whisper, "My brave daughter, You came back. Pharaoh Khaemwaset ducked through the low doorway into the humble dwelling, and what he saw stopped him completely. The hut contained almost nothing. A sleeping mat, a small clay lamp flickering with the last of its oil, a water jar, and a few simple cooking vessels. Everything the mother and daughter owned could have fit in a single palace room, yet the space radiated warmth and love that his golden chambers had never possessed. The clay oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, its small flame representing the fragile boundary between life and death in this simple home. Like Kia's life, it burned bravely but precariously, requiring constant tending to prevent darkness from claiming everything. Imhotep immediately knelt beside the sick woman, his experienced hands checking her pulse and temperature. His expression grew grave as he assessed her condition. The fever has progressed dangerously. Her body fights a battle. It may not have strength to win. Then give her that strength. Khaemwaset commanded, but his voice carried pleading rather than royal authority. The village gradually gathered outside the hut, their initial fear transforming into awestruck curiosity. Never had such distinguished visitors graced their community. Whispers spread that the tall stranger might be a great noble, perhaps even a prince, but none dared voice the impossible thought that divine royalty itself had entered their humble village. "Forgive our poverty, great lord," Khenti said apologetically, as Khaemwaset emerged from the hut. "We have little to offer visitors of your obvious importance. Simple food, clean water, and our poor shelters are all we possess." The pharaoh looked around at the village with new eyes. He saw not poverty but resourcefulness, not squalor but community. Gardens maintained through careful cooperation, children playing games that required imagination rather than expensive toys, neighbors helping neighbors with the daily tasks that survival demanded. "I see a village where people care for one another," he replied. "That is wealth beyond counting." As Imhotep prepared his medicines inside the hut, mixing rare compounds with precise measurements, the villagey women brought whatever comfort they could offer: clean water for washing, fresh bread still warm from their ovens, and oil to refill the dying lamp beside Kia's bed. "Will she live?" Nia asked the physician, her young face showing the strain of days spent hoping against growing despair. "We arrived in time," Imhotep said carefully. "The medicines I carry can fight this fever, but her body must find the will to accept healing." Outside, Pharaoh Khaemwaset sat on a simple wooden stool beside the village well, surrounded by his subjects who had no idea they spoke with divine authority. For the first time in decades, he experienced the fundamental human connection of shared concern for someone suffering, unmarred by ceremony or protocol. Inside the humble hut, physician Imhotep worked with the concentrated precision of a man racing against death itself. His golden chalice, normally reserved for the most sacred medical ceremonies in the palace, now served a far more urgent purpose: mixing precious medicines for a dying peasant woman. The ornate cup, encrusted with symbols of healing gods, caught the flickering lamplight as he dissolved rare powders in purified water. "This medicine comes from the distant lands of Punt," he explained to Naya, who watched every movement with desperate attention. "It fights the fire in her blood that common herbs cannot touch." Khaemwaset knelt beside Kia's sleeping mat, supporting her head, while Imhotep carefully administered the precious liquid. The golden chalice touched lips that had never known more valuable than clay cups, its divine symbols blessing a woman whose only claim to importance lay in her daughter's fierce love. "Drink slowly, honored mother," the pharaoh whispered gently. "Let the medicine find its way to where healing is needed most." Kia's eyes opened wider than they had in days, focusing with growing awareness on the man who held her. Even in her fevered state, she recognized something extraordinary in his bearing, his voice, his gentle authority that commanded without demanding. "My lord," she whispered weakly, "you honor our poor home with your presence. But surely you have more important places to be than beside a sick woman's bed." "There is no place more important," Khaemwaset replied, and meant every word. Outside, the village had transformed into something resembling a festival, though no one quite understood why. Women prepared food with unusual care, children played more quietly out of respect for the distinguished visitors, and men worked on small improvements to their homes and pathways, as if preparing for divine inspection. Old Sinib, the village healer, approached the hut with humble curiosity about the medical techniques being employed within. Imhotep welcomed him warmly, understanding that local knowledge could supplement royal medicine in ways textbooks could never teach. The fever comes from difficult childbirths. Sometimes, Sineb explained, watching Imhotep prepare additional compounds. Our remedies work for mild cases, but when it spreads deep into the body as hers has, we lose too many mothers. Show me your methods, Imhotep requested respectfully. Palace medicine may have rare ingredients, but village healing understands local conditions. The collaboration between royal physician and village healer created something remarkable, treatments that combined the best of both worlds. Sineb contributed knowledge about local herbs that enhanced the effectiveness of imported medicines, while Imhotep shared techniques for preparing compounds that maximized healing properties. As the afternoon progressed, Kia began showing the first signs of improvement. The terrible burning heat that had consumed her for days started yielding to the powerful medicines flowing through her system. Her breathing deepened, her restless movements calmed, and most encouraging of all, she began retaining the water they offered. "Mama, can you see me clearly?" Naya asked, hopefully, noticing her mother's eyes tracking movements with growing awareness. "My precious girl," Kia whispered, her voice stronger than it had been since the illness began. "You traveled so far, risked so much. How did you find such noble healers to help us?" Naya glanced at the pharaoh, uncertain how to explain the miracle that had brought divine assistance to their humble village. "I asked the gods for help, Mama, and they sent the best healers in all of Egypt." As evening approached, the village gathered around the well for their traditional communal meal. Tonight felt different, special in ways that had nothing to do with their visitors' obvious importance. The presence of genuine healing, of life being saved rather than lost, infused the community with joy that transcended their daily struggles. Khaemwaset found himself seated on the ground with farmers and craftsmen, sharing simple food that tasted more satisfying than elaborate palace banquets. Children who had overcome their initial shyness began approaching with questions about the wider world beyond their village borders. "Have you seen the Great Pyramids?" asked a boy of perhaps 8 years, his eyes bright with curiosity. "I have," the pharaoh replied with a smile. "But tonight, I think your village wells are more beautiful than all the monuments of Memphis." The golden chalice sat empty beside Imhotep's medical supplies, its sacred purpose fulfilled through service to desperate need. No temple ceremony had ever blessed it with greater holiness than this simple act of mercy, carrying life-giving medicine to a mother whose daughter's love had moved mountains and touched divine compassion. As stars emerged overhead, Kia slept peacefully for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, her fever broken, her body finally accepting nourishment, her spirit no longer fighting a losing battle against death. The village celebrated quietly, understanding that they witnessed something extraordinary, not just healing but the power of compassion to transform both giver and receiver. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern dunes when the sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful village atmosphere. Captain Khaemhab rose swiftly from his sleeping mat, hand instinctively moving to his sword as a royal messenger thundered into the village center, his mount lathered with sweat from hard riding through the night. The messenger dismounted and approached with the urgent bearing of one carrying news that could not wait. In his hands, he clutched a papyrus scroll bearing the distinctive royal seal, but not the pharaoh's own seal. This bore the mark of High Priest Amenhotep, pressed deep into red wax with the authority of religious emergency. "Captain Khaemhab," the messenger called breathlessly, "I bear urgent summons from the palace. Border tensions with the Nubians have escalated. Several outposts report unusual military movements. The High Priest demands His Majesty's immediate return to address matters of state security." The village, awakened by the commotion, gathered at respectful distances to observe this dramatic interruption. Even without understanding the specific words, they recognized the urgency in the messenger's voice and the gravity in Captain Khaemwaset's expression. Pharaoh Khaemwaset emerged from Kia's hut, where he had spent the night monitoring her recovery. The sight of the royal messenger and the familiar seal filled him with conflicting emotions, duty pulling him toward responsibilities he could not ignore, compassion anchoring him to a mission not yet complete. "What news from the borders?" he asked, accepting the scroll. "3 Nubian raiding parties have crossed into Egyptian territory. Your Majesty, they test our defenses while you are absent from the capital. The High Priest believes your presence is essential to demonstrate strength and divine authority." Khaemwaset unrolled the papyrus, reading Amenhotep's carefully worded message. Between the formal language of religious duty and state necessity, he detected something more personal, a not-so-subtle reminder that divine rulers belonged in palaces, not in peasant villages playing healer to common folk. "The priest writes that your continued absence emboldens enemies who interpret compassion as weakness," the messenger continued. "He fears that word of your humanitarian mission may be spreading beyond our borders." Naya appeared in the doorway behind the pharaoh, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night spent caring for her recovering mother. She had heard enough to understand that her saviors were being called away, possibly before her mother's healing was complete. "My lord," she said quietly, "if duty calls you back to important matters, we understand. You have already given us more than we dared hope for." The simple generosity of her words, releasing him from obligation even while fearing the consequences, struck Khaemwaset more powerfully than any royal decree. Here stood a child offering to sacrifice her mother's life, rather than burden him with guilt over choosing duty over compassion. Captain Khaemwaset studied his ruler's face, reading the internal struggle that played out in his eyes. "Your Majesty, the borders are indeed important. If the Nubians sense weakness in leadership, and if I abandon this mission now," Khaemwaset interrupted, "what message does that send about the value I place on my people's lives? That royal compassion lasts only until royal convenience is threatened." Imhotep emerged from the hut with encouraging news. "Your Majesty, the woman's fever has broken completely. Her body accepts medicine and nourishment. With continued care, she should recover fully within days." "Days," the pharaoh repeated thoughtfully. "And the Nubian situation?" The messenger shifted uncomfortably. The high priest emphasized urgency. "Your Majesty, each day of delay allows enemies to interpret your absence as weakness or indifference to Egyptian security." Village elder Kenti approached with the careful respect of a man who understood he witnessed momentous decisions. "Great Lord, whatever choice you make, our village will never forget your kindness. You have already saved a life that our poor skills could not preserve." Queen Nefertari's voice seemed to whisper in the desert wind, her gentle encouragement from their private conversation about compassion requiring courage to maintain against opposition. The decision crystallized as Khaemwaset realized that true leadership meant accepting criticism for doing what conscience demanded. "Captain, send word to the high priest that I will return when this mission is complete, not before. If the Nubians mistake mercy for weakness, they will learn otherwise when I return to deal with them properly." The messenger's eyes widened at this unprecedented defiance of religious and political pressure. "Your Majesty, the priest will be displeased." "The priest's displeasure concerns me less than this child's mother's recovery. We stay until our work here is finished." Relief flooded Naya's young face, followed immediately by gratitude so profound she could barely speak. The village murmured with amazement at witnessing a great lord choose their needs over his own political necessities. 3 days after the royal messenger's departure, a miracle occurred that would be spoken of in Khemenu for generations. Kia opened her eyes as the morning sun streamed through the small window of her hut, and for the first time in weeks, her gaze was clear and focused. The terrible fever that had nearly claimed her life was gone, replaced by the gentle weakness of recovery rather than the consuming fire of approaching death. Nea, she whispered, her voice soft but unmistakably stronger than it had been since her illness began. Her daughter, who had been dozing fitfully beside the sleeping mat, jerked awake instantly. The transformation in her mother's appearance was so dramatic that Nea gasped with joy and disbelief. Gone was the waxy pallor of impending death, replaced by the natural color of healing. Kia's eyes, which had been glazed and unfocused for days, now tracked her daughter's movements with maternal awareness. "Mama!" Nea cried, tears streaming down her face as she gently embraced her mother. "You're truly better. The fever is gone." "I remember so little," Kia said wonderingly, attempting to sit up with Nea's careful assistance. There were dreams of burning, of darkness pressing close, and then coolness, relief, the taste of medicine unlike anything our village healer possesses. The first smile Nea had seen on her mother's face in weeks appeared like sunrise after the longest night. That simple expression of returning life and awareness became a treasure more precious than all the gold in Pharaoh's treasury. A mother's love restored to a daughter who had nearly lost everything that mattered. Pharaoh Khaemwaset, who had maintained a vigil outside their hut throughout the critical night, entered at Nea's joyful call. The sight that greeted him stopped him in the doorway. Kia, propped up against rolled blankets, looked at him with growing recognition of his nobility and growing amazement at his presence in her humble home. "My lord," she said, her voice carrying the wonder of someone emerging from a fevered dream into impossible reality. "My daughter tells me you traveled from the great palace to save my life. Surely this cannot be true." "It is true, honored mother," Khaemwaset replied gently, kneeling beside her mat with the same reverence he might show in temple worship. "Your daughter's courage moved divine hearts. Her love for you inspired a journey that has changed us all." Kia's eyes filled with tears as the magnitude of what had occurred began penetrating her recovering mind. The greatest healers in Egypt had come to her village, had used their precious medicines to save a woman whose only value lay in her daughter's fierce devotion. The impossibility of such kindness overwhelmed her with gratitude beyond expression. "I have nothing to offer in return," she whispered, shame coloring her voice. "No gold, no precious gifts, nothing worthy of such generosity." "You have already given more than you know," the pharaoh assured her. "You have shown me that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the love that connects hearts across any distance, any barrier of station or circumstance." Outside the hut, the village had gathered for their morning activities, but an unusual excitement filled the air. Word of Kia's dramatic recovery spread quickly, and villagers approached the dwelling with offerings of their own. Flowers picked from carefully tended gardens, small portions of their best food, hand-woven cloth to make the recovering woman more comfortable. Imhotep entered to examine his patient, his professional satisfaction evident as he checked her pulse, temperature, and general condition. "The fever has broken completely," he announced with genuine pleasure. "Her body has accepted the medicine fully. With proper nourishment and rest, she will regain her full strength within days." The village elder Kenti appeared with several other community leaders, their faces showing the profound relief of people who had watched one of their own approach death and return to life through intervention they could never have imagined. "Great Lord," Kenti said formally, "our village wishes to hold a celebration of thanksgiving for this miracle. Nothing elaborate. We are simple people with simple means, but we would honor your kindness and the gods who guided you to us." As the day progressed, the celebration took shape organically. Women prepared the best food their stores could provide. Men gathered wood for a great fire. Children picked flowers to decorate the village center, and musicians brought out instruments that had been silent during the dark days of Kia's illness. That evening, under stars that seemed to shine with special brightness, the village of Khemenu celebrated life, healing, and the miraculous compassion that had saved one of their own. At the center of their joy sat Kia, weak but smiling, surrounded by the love that had literally moved mountains to preserve her life. The celebration had ended, but Pharaoh Khaemwaset found sleep elusive, as he sat beside the village well under the star-filled desert sky. The ancient stone structure, weathered by generations of daily use, had become his place of contemplation during their stay in Khemenu. Tonight, its significance struck him with profound clarity. This simple well represented life itself for the entire community, just as his healing mission had represented hope for one desperate family. "My lord," Naya approached quietly, recognizing the thoughtful mood that had settled over their benefactor. "Cannot sleep? I am thinking, child," he replied, making room for her on the stone rim of the well, "about wells and villages and the responsibility that comes with power to help." The village well, carved from local stone by hands long since turned to dust, bore the smooth wear patterns of countless water jars lifted by countless women over countless generations. Each mark told a story of daily survival, community cooperation, and the fundamental truth that life depended on shared resources carefully maintained. "This well serves your entire village," Khaemwaset observed, "but I wonder how many villages like yours exist throughout my kingdom? How many mothers lie sick without healers? How many children watch their parents suffer without hope of medicine? How many communities struggle with problems that royal resources could easily solve?" Naya considered his question with the seriousness it deserved. "Many, I think, my lord. In the next village over, they have no healer at all since old Ankaf died last season. And beyond the eastern hills, people say the wells have been running low because the seasonal rains have failed twice." The magnitude of unaddressed suffering throughout his realm began crystallizing in Khaemwaset's mind. For 37 years he had ruled from his golden palace, receiving reports that reduced human misery to statistics and administrative problems. This journey had shown him the faces behind those numbers, the individual stories of struggle that bureaucratic summaries could never capture. "If I can travel 3 days to save one mother," he said slowly, thinking aloud, "why have I never organized missions to save hundreds of mothers? If royal physicians can heal one village's sick, why have they never been sent to heal the sick in dozens of villages?" The implications of his questions reached far beyond immediate medical mission. They touched the fundamental nature of kingship itself, whether divine authority existed to maintain comfortable distance from subjects' problems, or to actively engage with and solve those problems through compassionate application of royal resources. Elder Kenti emerged from his hut, drawn by voices at the community gathering place. "Forgive the intrusion, great lord. I heard discussion and wondered if our village could assist with your contemplations. Tell me about other communities in this region, Khaemwaset. What challenges do they face that royal intervention might address?" Kenti settled onto the well's stone rim, his weathered face reflecting decades of regional knowledge. "The village of Khemar, 2 days south, lost half their harvest to insects because they lack proper storage techniques. Abu Seneb, to the west, has skilled potters, but no way to transport their work or markets where it might bring fair prices. And Het Kaka struggles with bandits who prey on their trade caravans because they have no armed protection." Each problem Kenti described represented solvable challenges, difficulties that existed not because solutions were impossible, but because royal attention had never focused on rural communities' practical needs. The pharaoh possessed resources, knowledge, and authority that could transform these struggling villages, yet bureaucratic distance had prevented such applications of power. "What if," Khaemwaset said carefully, his vision taking shape, royal policy included regular missions to assess and address village needs? What if palace physicians made circuits through rural areas, palace engineers helped with irrigation and construction projects, royal guards provided protection for vulnerable communities? Naya's eyes widened with excitement at the possibilities. "You could save so many people, my lord, not just from sickness, but from hunger, from fear, from all the troubles that make life hard for common folk." The village well seemed to pulse with symbolic significance as the pharaoh's new understanding deepened. Just as this stone structure sustained an entire community through shared maintenance and careful stewardship, royal power could sustain the broader kingdom through systematic compassion and practical assistance. But such changes would require fundamental shifts in how the palace operates, he mused. Court advisors would resist diverting resources from traditional royal purposes toward peasant welfare programs. Great Lord, Kenti said respectfully, speaking for our village and others like it, we would gladly offer whatever assistance such programs might require. Our labor, our local knowledge, our cooperation, all would be freely given to help create the changes you envision. The morning that would forever change the course of Egyptian history began like any other. Pharaoh Khaemwaset sat beside the village well, sharing morning bread with Naya, while discussing plans for their departure. Kia had recovered sufficiently to walk short distances, and physician Imhotep declared her ready for the gentle activity that would restore her full strength. We will leave detailed instructions for continued care. Imhotep was explaining to village healer Senib, and I will ensure that supplies of these medicines reach your village regularly through established trade routes. Captain Kamhob approached from the village outskirts, where he had been maintaining security watch throughout their stay. His expression carried unusual tension as he gestured for private conversation with his ruler. Your Majesty, he said quietly, a lone rider approaches from the north. He bears himself like palace guard, but travels in disguise. Something feels wrong about this approach. The rider entered the village center moments later, dismounting with the fluid grace of elite military training, despite his common clothing and unremarkable horse. Lieutenant Keti, one of the palace's younger guards, approached with the careful deference of a man delivering news he wished he did not carry. Your Majesty, he said, kneeling in the dust before his ruler, I bring urgent and disturbing information from Captain Ankef of Palace Security. Your life may be in immediate danger. The morning's peaceful atmosphere shattered like pottery dropped on stone. Village activities ceased as the gravity in the lieutenant's voice penetrated even to those who could not understand his specific words. Explain quickly, Khaemwaset commanded, rising from his seat at the well. Lieutenant Keti glanced around nervously, noting the villagers gathering at respectful distances. Perhaps we should speak privately, Your Majesty. The information involves delicate matters of palace security. 6 freely. These people have earned the right to hear whatever affects their safety as well as mine. The lieutenant reached into his travel pack and withdrew a small object that glinted in the morning sunlight, a poison ring, its innocent appearance concealing a deadly mechanism designed for assassination. The ring's craftsmanship was exquisite, its gold setting holding a tiny compartment that could deliver fatal poison through a seemingly accidental scratch. Captain Ankef discovered this among High Priest Amenhotep's personal belongings during a routine security inspection, Keti explained, his voice tight with the implications. Further investigation revealed correspondence with certain court nobles who oppose your recent departures from traditional royal behavior. The words hit like physical blows. The conspiracy against his life had originated not with foreign enemies or unknown assassins, but with trusted advisors who saw his compassionate mission as dangerous precedent requiring permanent elimination. The High Priest, Khaemwaset repeated, struggling to comprehend betrayal from such an unexpected source. Amenhotep has served my family for 20 years. The correspondence indicates that your journey to this village was seen as final proof of dangerous instability in royal judgment. The conspirators believed that eliminating you now, while you were away from palace protection, would appear to be the result of bandit attack or desert accident. Naya stepped closer, her young face showing protective fury that a child's pure heart could feel for someone who had saved her mother's life. They want to hurt you because you helped us. The simple question cut to the heart of the conspiracy's twisted logic. Khaemwaset's act of mercy, his willingness to risk everything for strangers' welfare, had been interpreted as weakness requiring correction through murder. Captain Kemhab's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. "Your Majesty, we must return to Memphis immediately. Every moment away from palace security increases the danger." "No," the pharaoh said firmly, his voice carrying steel forged through days of desert hardship and village wisdom. Returning in fear would validate their belief that compassion makes rulers weak. "We will return, but as conquerors of conspiracy, not as victims fleeing justice." Lieutenant Ketty produced additional evidence, coded messages discussing timing, methods, and the political benefits of eliminating a pharaoh who had lost touch with divine duty through inappropriate concern for common subjects. "The poison ring was to be used during your return journey," he explained. "A scratch during some staged encounter, appearing accidental but delivering death within hours." The village gathered closer, their faces showing the fierce loyalty that the pharaoh's kindness had earned. These simple farmers and craftsmen, who owned nothing of material value, were prepared to defend their benefactor with their lives against palace conspirators who possessed everything except honor. "Great Lord," Elder Kenty declared, "if enemies threaten you, our village stands ready to fight beside you." The offer of protection from people he had come to save touched Khaemwaset more deeply than any royal tribute or courtly ceremony ever had. The farewell at Kamenyu carried weight that transcended ordinary departures. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson, the entire village gathered around the ancient loyalty oath stone, a weathered granite monument where their ancestors had pledged allegiance to pharaohs for generations beyond memory. Today, that stone would witness vows of a different nature. Kia, still weak but determined to stand for this moment, leaned heavily on her daughter's strong young arm. The transformation in her appearance since their arrival seemed miraculous. Color had returned to her cheeks, clarity to her eyes, and most precious of all, hope to her smile. "My lord," she said, her voice carrying across the morning stillness, "I have no words adequate to express what you have given us. You saved not just my life, but my daughter's future, our family's hope, everything that makes life worth living." Elder Kenty stepped forward, carrying a simple clay tablet inscribed with symbols that represented the village's most sacred commitment. "Great Pharaoh," he began formally, his words witnessed by every man, woman, and child in Kemanu. "We pledge ourselves and our descendants to your service, not from obligation or fear, but from gratitude and love." One by one, village leaders approached the loyalty oath stone, pressing their hands to its ancient surface while speaking vows that bound their community to Khaemwaset's cause. These were not the elaborate ceremonies of palace protocol, but heartfelt promises from people who understood the true meaning of loyalty earned through compassion. "If enemies threaten you in the great palace," declared Ankmose, the village's best fighter despite his advanced years, "send word to Kemanu. We may be simple farmers, but we know how to defend those who defend us." Young Naya approached the pharaoh carrying a small bundle wrapped in clean linen. "My lord, I have nothing of value to give you except this." She unwrapped her mother's silver bracelet, the treasure she had carried to Memphis to pay for her desperate journey. "It is all we own of worth, but please accept it as token of our eternal gratitude." Khaemwaset knelt to accept the gift, understanding that its value lay not in precious metal, but in the sacrifice it represented. This bracelet had been Naya's insurance against starvation during her impossible quest, yet she offered it freely to honor his kindness. "I will treasure this always," he promised, fastening the simple silver band around his own wrist, where it would rest beside royal jewelry worth 1,000 times more, yet meaning infinitely less. Lieutenant Ketty had spent the night developing strategic plans for their return journey to Memphis. The evidence of conspiracy required careful handling. Approaching the palace with accusations against the high priest demanded preparation that would prevent the conspirators from destroying evidence or eliminating witnesses. "Your Majesty," he reported, "I recommend we travel by indirect route, gathering loyal supporters before confronting the traitors. Captain Ankef has identified several palace guards who can be trusted completely, and Queen Nefertari has been secretly informed of the situation." The mention of his beloved wife brought both comfort and concern to Khaemwaset's mind. Nefertari's intelligence and courage made her a valuable ally, but her proximity to the conspirators also placed her in potential danger if the plot extended beyond what they currently understood. We cannot delay too long, he decided. Every day we remain away allows the conspirators to strengthen their position or eliminate evidence. But neither can we return unprepared for confrontation with enemies who wear the masks of trusted advisors. Captain Kama supervised the loading of their simple cart, now carrying additional supplies provided by grateful villagers. Dried foods, herbal medicines, and small gifts that collectively represented the village's entire surplus. Everything they could spare for the man who had saved one of their own. As their modest procession prepared to depart, Pharaoh Khaemwaset took one final look around the village that had changed his understanding of kingship forever. The mud brick huts, the precious well, the small gardens carefully tended against the desert's harsh demands, all of it represented values he had discovered through necessity and would carry back to transform his rule. Remember, he called to the assembled villagers, the changes we discussed will come to pass. Royal physicians will visit rural communities regularly. Palace engineers will help with irrigation projects. Guards will protect trade routes. The compassion you have shown me will be reflected in royal policy throughout the kingdom. The loyalty oath stone stood witness as the village of Kemenu watched their savior disappear into the desert morning, carrying with him the hopes of common people everywhere that divine power might finally serve divine compassion. Behind him, he left a community transformed by the knowledge that their lives mattered to the highest authority in the land, while ahead lay the dangerous task of confronting those who would kill to prevent such transformations from spreading. The great throne room of Memphis had never witnessed a scene such as this. Pharaoh Khaemwaset strode through the massive doors flanked by Captain Ankef and his most trusted guards, carrying in his hands the Truth Scroll, a papyrus document containing every detail of the assassination conspiracy, every name of those involved, every piece of evidence that Lieutenant Keti's investigation had uncovered. High Priest Amenhotep stood at the center of the court, surrounded by the nobles who had supported his plot, their faces showing the confident expectation of men who believed their plan had succeeded. They had spent days spreading rumors that the pharaoh's extended absence proved his unfitness for rule, that his compassionate mission to save a peasant woman demonstrated dangerous weakness requiring correction. "Your Divine Majesty," Amenhotep called out with false relief as Khaemwaset approached, "thank the gods you have returned safely to us. We feared that bandits or desert dangers might have befallen you during your humanitarian journey." The calculated words, delivered with perfect theatrical concern, contained subtle mockery that only someone who knew the conspiracy's depth could detect. Around the throne room, courtiers who had remained loyal shifted nervously, sensing undercurrents they could not fully understand. Queen Nefertari, seated on her smaller throne beside the great seat of royal authority, allowed the faintest smile to cross her lips as she recognized the controlled fury in her husband's bearing. She had spent days carefully observing the conspirators, noting their confidence, their whispered conversations, their obvious belief that the pharaoh would never return to challenge their betrayal. "Indeed, High Priest," Khaemwaset replied, his voice carrying the authority of 37 years of rule. "There were dangers along the journey, some more treacherous than desert bandits or wild animals, some wearing the faces of trusted advisors." A subtle tension rippled through the assembled court as those words penetrated. The conspirators' expressions began shifting from confident expectation toward growing unease, while loyal courtiers leaned forward to better understand the drama unfolding before them. Captain Ankef stepped forward, his weathered face grim with the weight of betrayal discovered within palace walls. In his hands he carried the poison ring that had been intended for the pharaoh's assassination, its innocent appearance masking deadly purpose. "Behold the gift that High Priest Amenhotep prepared for his divine ruler," Ankef announced, holding the ring where all could see its craftsmanship. A masterwork of assassination designed to deliver death through a scratch that would appear accidental. The court erupted in gasps and murmurs of shock as the ring's true purpose became clear. Even nobles who had grown accustomed to palace intrigue felt stunned by the audacity of planning regicide through such calculated deception. Amenhotep's face drained of color, but he maintained his composure with the skill of a man accustomed to political maneuvering. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot believe such wild accusations. I have served your family faithfully for 20 years. 20 years of faithful service," Khaemwaset agreed, unrolling the truth scroll before the assembled court, "until my act of compassion toward a dying peasant woman convinced you that I had become unfit to rule. Your own correspondence condemns you, written in your hand, sealed with your personal mark." The scroll contained damning evidence that Lieutenant Ketty's investigation had uncovered. Detailed plans for the assassination, discussions of political benefits from eliminating a pharaoh who showed dangerous sympathy for common subjects, and coordination with nobles who shared Amenhotep's belief that divine rulers should maintain distance from mortal concern. Lord Senenmut, one of the conspirators, attempted to salvage the situation through desperate denial. "These documents could be forgeries, Your Majesty. Anyone seeking to discredit loyal servants might create false evidence." Captain Unkef produced additional proof. The assassination device's designer, a craftsman who had been promised great reward for creating the poison ring, now trembling as he confirmed every detail of the plot's development. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The craftsman confessed, his voice shaking with terror at his role in attempted regicide. "A staged encounter during your return journey, a friendly greeting that would deliver fatal poison through what appeared to be accidental contact." The magnitude of betrayal settled over the court like desert sand after a windstorm. Trusted advisors, men who had shared in royal councils and participated in governing decisions, had plotted murder simply because their ruler had shown mercy to desperate subjects. "Your Divine Majesty," Queen Nefertari said, rising from her throne with regal dignity, "what punishment befits those who would kill compassion itself?" The truth scroll in Khaemwaset's hand seemed to pulse with righteous authority as he prepared to deliver judgment that would echo through Egyptian history. 7 months after the conspiracy's exposure and the conspirators' exile to distant provinces, the Great Hall of Memphis buzzed with unprecedented activity. Scribes worked at dozens of tables, carefully inscribing the reform decree, a comprehensive document that would fundamentally transform how divine authority served the common people of Egypt. The papyrus bore symbols of royal power, but its contents spoke of revolutionary compassion. Pharaoh Khaemwaset reviewed each section personally, ensuring that the lessons learned during his journey to save Naya's mother would be enshrined in permanent law. The decree established royal physician circuits that would visit rural villages monthly, palace engineer corps dedicated to improving irrigation and construction in poor communities, and guard detachments assigned to protect trade routes that served common merchants. "Your Majesty," reported Chief Administrator Hui, spreading detailed maps across the council table, "the first physician missions have already begun, yielding remarkable results. Village mortality rates have decreased by half in communities where royal healers have established regular visits." Queen Nefertari, now actively involved in overseeing the humanitarian programs, added her own observations. "The educational initiatives are exceeding expectations as well. Village children who previously had no access to learning are demonstrating exceptional aptitude when given opportunity." The reform decree contained provisions that would have seemed impossible before the pharaoh's transformative journey. Royal granaries would maintain emergency supplies for communities facing harvest failures. Palace workshops would train rural craftsmen in advanced techniques. Most revolutionary of all, village representatives would be brought to Memphis annually to advise the throne on common people's needs and concerns. Young scribe Khaemwaset, recently appointed to coordinate village affairs, approached with the latest reports from rural communities. "Your Majesty, we have received responses from 47 villages requesting assistance with various projects. The enthusiasm for royal support programs appears unlimited. The comprehensive nature of transformation required careful implementation to avoid overwhelming palace resources or creating unrealistic expectations among Egypt's countless rural communities. Each program had been designed with sustainability in mind, creating systems that would continue functioning long after the initial royal mandate. Captain Khaemwaset, now promoted to oversee rural security operations, presented military reports that demonstrated the program's success beyond humanitarian measures. Bandit activity has decreased significantly in areas where royal guards provide regular patrols. Trade volumes have increased as merchants feel safer traveling previously dangerous routes. The economic benefits of compassionate governance were becoming as evident as the humanitarian one. Villages with access to royal medical care produced more goods because fewer workers were lost to preventable illnesses. Communities receiving engineering assistance could irrigate larger areas, increasing agricultural output that benefited the entire kingdom. The Nubian situation has resolved itself favorably as well, reported Foreign Minister Ayman Heb, who had replaced the disgraced conspirators. Border tribes that once raided Egyptian settlements now seek peaceful trade relationships. They interpret your compassionate leadership as strength rather than weakness. The international implications of the pharaoh's transformed approach to governance were spreading beyond Egypt's borders. Neighboring kingdoms sent envoys to study the humanitarian programs, recognizing that societies caring for all their people developed greater stability and prosperity than those that ignored common welfare. Lord Nokshamin, the new high priest selected for his alignment with compassionate values rather than rigid tradition, offered religious perspective on the changes. The temple's report increased devotion throughout the kingdom. People who feel valued by their ruler demonstrate greater loyalty to both throne and gods. The reform decree established permanent institutions that would outlast any individual ruler. The Office of Village Affairs would continue coordinating rural assistance programs. The Royal Compassion Corps would maintain medical and engineering support for remote communities. Most importantly, the tradition of annual village representation would ensure that future pharaohs remained connected to their subjects' needs. Your Majesty, Queen Nefertari observed, as they reviewed implementation reports, what began as a mission to save one mother has grown into salvation for thousands of families throughout the kingdom. The transformation's scope amazed even those who had participated in creating it. Village after village reported improved health, increased prosperity, reduced crime, and strengthened community bonds as royal support addressed long-ignored problems with systematic compassion. As evening approached, Pharaoh Khaemwaset stood on the palace balcony overlooking Memphis, watching smoke rise from countless hearths where families gathered for evening meals. His silver bracelet, Naya's gift from that first transformative journey, caught the setting sun's light, reminding him daily of the human connections that made divine authority meaningful. The reform decree would be proclaimed throughout the kingdom at tomorrow's dawn, officially establishing the programs that were already changing countless lives. Egypt was becoming not just a powerful patriot but a compassionate one, proving that strength and mercy could coexist in ways that strengthened both ruler and subject. The gratitude necklace around Pharaoh Khaemwaset's neck caught the morning light as his royal barge approached the familiar shores of Kamenu. The simple clay beads, strung by Naya's own hands and given as the most precious gift a poor village child could offer, had become his most treasured ornament, worn beneath royal regalia during state ceremonies, visible symbol of the transformation that had reshaped his understanding of true wealth. 9 months had passed since his first desperate journey to save Kia's life, and the changes wrought throughout the kingdom made this return visit feel like entering a different world. The village that had once struggled for basic survival now thrived with prosperity that careful royal support had nurtured into sustainable abundance. Your Majesty, Captain Khaemwaset observed, as their modest escort approached the shoreline, the village has grown considerably. Those new structures weren't here during our first visit. Indeed, Kamenu had expanded beyond its original boundaries, New homes of improved construction dotted the landscape, their design reflecting both traditional village architecture and engineering techniques shared by royal builders. Gardens flourished with irrigation systems that palace engineers had helped design and implement. Most remarkably, a small school building stood where once only empty desert had stretched. The village's transformation became even more apparent as their party disembarked. Children who had once played in dusty pathways now learned reading and mathematics in the new school. Women who had once struggled to draw water from the ancient well now utilized an improved system that provided cleaner, more abundant supply. Men who had once scratched subsistence living from poor soil now harvested crops from fields enriched through royal agricultural assistance. Naya appeared on the village's main pathway, but the terrified, exhausted child who had collapsed in the throne room had grown into a confident young woman whose bearing reflected both natural intelligence and newfound education. At 15, she moved with the grace of someone who had discovered her own capabilities through opportunity rather than desperation. "Your Majesty," she called joyfully, running toward the royal party with unguarded enthusiasm that palace protocol would never have permitted, but which Khaemwaset treasured beyond formal courtesy. Behind her came Kia, whose transformation seemed even more miraculous. The woman who had lain dying in a humble hut now radiated health and vitality that made her previous illness seem like half-remembered nightmare. Her eyes sparkled with maternal pride as she watched her daughter greet the man who had saved both their lives and given them futures they could never have imagined. "My lord," Kia said, embracing the pharaoh with the warmth reserved for beloved family members, "welcome back to our home. Though it is greatly changed from the poor place you first knew." The village gathered as word of the royal visit spread, but their demeanor differed remarkably from the terrified deference they had shown during that first desperate encounter. These people approached their pharaoh as neighbors welcoming a cherished friend, their respect mixed with genuine affection earned through consistent care for their welfare. Elder Kenti, now visibly strengthened by improved nutrition and medical care that royal physicians provided during monthly visits, presented a scroll that documented the village's progress. "Great Pharaoh, we wish you to see what your compassion has accomplished." The statistics were impressive. Childhood mortality reduced to nearly zero through regular medical attention. Agricultural output increased threefold through improved irrigation and techniques. Literacy rates climbing as village children received education previously reserved for urban elites. But more meaningful than numbers was the evident transformation in community spirit and individual hope. "Naya has become our village teacher," Kia explained proudly. "The royal education she received during her visits to Memphis has prepared her to instruct other children in reading, writing, and mathematics. She dreams now of establishing a larger school that might serve several villages in this region." The young woman who had once possessed nothing but fierce love for her dying mother now planned educational programs that would lift entire communities from ignorance to knowledge. Her transformation embodied the multiplication effect that compassionate leadership could achieve, one life saved becoming catalyst for hundreds of lives improved. "And you, honored Kia," the pharaoh inquired, "how do you spend your days now that health has returned?" "I work with the royal physicians during their monthly visits," she replied with evident satisfaction. "My experience with illness and recovery helps them understand patients' fears and needs. I have become translator between medical knowledge and village understanding." As they toured the transformed community, Khaemwaset marveled at how systematic compassion had created changes that extended far beyond material improvements. The gratitude necklace resting against his chest seemed to pulse with warmth as he witnessed the flowering of human potential that royal support had made possible. The teaching scroll spread across the polished table in Pharaoh Khaemwaset's private study contained wisdom earned through transformation rather than inherited through tradition. Written in his own careful hand, the document recorded principles of compassionate leadership that he was determined to pass on to his successor, insights that could never be found in ancient texts because they had been discovered through lived experience rather than scholarly analysis. Prince Amenhotep, his eldest son and heir to the throne, sat beside his father, reading each carefully crafted phrase with the attention of a young man who understood he was receiving more than political instruction. At 25, the prince had grown up watching his father's evolution from distant divine authority to engaged servant of his people's welfare. The fundamental error of traditional kingship, Khaemwaset read aloud from his teaching scroll, lies in believing that divine authority requires separation from subjects' lives. In truth, the gods grant power specifically to improve mortal existence, not to remain aloof from it. The prince studied the passage thoughtfully. Father, how do you balance individual compassion with kingdom-wide governance? Surely you cannot personally respond to every citizen's needs as you did for Naya and her mother. You cannot, his father agreed, but you can create systems that respond systematically to such needs. The village physician programs, the engineering assistance corps, the educational initiatives, all represent ways to multiply individual compassion into institutional mercy. The teaching scroll contained detailed sections on each program that the reformed government had implemented. More than mere policy descriptions, these passages explained the reasoning behind each initiative, the obstacles encountered during implementation, and the unexpected benefits that compassionate governance had produced throughout the kingdom. Queen Nefertari entered the study carrying reports from the latest village representative meetings, sessions where common people advised the throne about rural needs and concerns. Her involvement in humanitarian programs had grown into full partnership in governing, her insights into social welfare proving as valuable as traditional military and economic councils. The representatives from the southern provinces report remarkable progress in regional stability, she informed them, spreading documents across the table beside the teaching scroll. Villages that once competed for scarce resources now cooperate on shared projects that benefit entire regions. Prince Amenhotep examined the reports with growing appreciation for the comprehensive nature of his father's reforms. These changes appear to be self-sustaining rather than dependent on royal maintenance. Is that intentional? Essential, Khaemwaset confirmed. Compassionate leadership must create conditions that continue improving people's lives long after any individual ruler's death. The institutions we have established will serve Egypt for generations if properly maintained. The teaching scroll dedicated entire sections to the practical aspects of sustaining humanitarian programs through changing political conditions. Future pharaohs would inherit not just power, but responsibility for systems that millions of citizens had learned to depend upon for their welfare and prosperity. Chief Administrator Hoid arrived with the latest quarterly reports from all royal compassion programs, his arms filled with scrolls that documented the expanding scope of government-sponsored assistance. Your Majesty, the success of current programs has created demand for expansion into areas we had not originally considered. The reports detailed requests for royal support with legal advocacy for common citizens, assistance with trade route development, and coordination of disaster relief efforts that individual villages could not manage independently. Each new need identified represented opportunity to extend compassionate governance into previously ignored aspects of Egyptian life. The challenge facing future rulers, Khaemwaset explained to his son, will be maintaining the spirit of these programs while adapting their implementation to changing circumstances. The specific methods may evolve, but the underlying commitment to serving subjects' welfare must remain constant. As evening approached, father and son worked together to complete sections of the teaching scroll that would guide royal behavior long after both had joined their ancestors. The document represented more than policy manual, it was blueprint for leadership that honored both divine authority and human dignity. Father, Prince Amenhotep said as they prepared to conclude their session, I understand now why the nobility initially resisted these changes. Compassionate leadership requires more effort than distant authority, more personal investment than ceremonial rule. It requires more. His father agreed, but it provides more as well. The satisfaction of knowing your power serves noble purposes, the joy of witnessing lives transformed through royal assistance, the security that comes from ruling subjects who love rather than fear their leader. The teaching scroll would be preserved in the palace archives, but more importantly, its principles would be embedded in the prince's character through daily observation of compassionate governance in practice. The wisdom contained in its carefully crafted passages represented the difference between ruling over people and ruling for people, a distinction that would define Egyptian leadership for generations to come. 25 years had passed since a desperate girl collapsed in the throne room, gasping words that would transform an empire. Pharaoh Khaemwaset, now aged but still vigorous at 73, stood beside the memory stone that had been erected in the village of Kamenu to commemorate the moment when divine compassion had changed the course of Egyptian history. The granite monument bore simple hieroglyphs, telling the story of how one act of mercy had grown into a kingdom-wide transformation. The village around the memory stone had evolved into something approaching a small city, its growth fueled by decades of careful royal support and the natural prosperity that followed when human potential was allowed to flourish. What had once been a desperate community of subsistence farmers had become a center of learning and innovation that drew visitors from throughout the region. Naya, now 40 years old and serving as regional administrator for village development programs, approached the memory stone with her own children, 3 bright youngsters who had never known the fear and desperation that had once defined life in rural Egypt. Her hair showed silver threads that caught the afternoon sunlight, but her eyes retained the fierce intelligence that had impressed the pharaoh during their first encounter. "Your Majesty," she said warmly, embracing the ruler who had become more family than sovereign to the people of Kamenu, "Mother waits at the house. She insisted on preparing your favorite meal, though we warned her that royal tastes might have grown more sophisticated over the years." Khaemwaset smiled at the thought of Kia, now 65 and serving as grandmother figure to half the children in the expanded community. Her recovery from near death had become legendary throughout the region, inspiring countless stories about the power of love to move mountains and touch divine hearts. The memory stone stood 9 feet tall, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon light across carved symbols that future generations would read to understand how their prosperity had begun. At its base, fresh flowers appeared daily, offerings from villagers who maintained the monument as living testimony to the transformation of their lives. "The stone is beautiful," the pharaoh observed, running his weathered fingers across hieroglyphs that told their shared story, "but the real monument stands all around us. These thriving homes, those healthy children playing in safe streets, the school where young minds discover possibilities their grandparents could never have imagined." Prince Amenhotep, now crowned as co-ruler and fully committed to continuing his father's compassionate approach to governance, stood quietly beside the memory stone with his own young son. The child listened with rapt attention as his grandfather and the village administrator discussed programs that had become the foundation of Egyptian social policy. "Grandfather," the young prince asked, "why did the old pharaohs not help villages the way you do?" The question prompted reflection on how radically Egyptian leadership had evolved since that first desperate journey to save a dying mother. "They were not cruel men," Khaemwaset explained gently, "but they had never learned that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than standing above them." As evening approached, the royal party made their way to Kia's house, the same humble dwelling where the pharaoh had first witnessed the power of love to inspire impossible sacrifice. The building had been expanded and improved over the years, but Kia had insisted on preserving the original room where her recovery had begun, maintaining it as private shrine to the miracle of second chances. Kia emerged to greet her guests, her movements slower than in younger years, but her spirit undimmed by age. The woman who had once lain dying now radiated the contentment of someone whose life had been extended, not just in years but in purpose and meaning. "My dear Pharaoh," she said, taking his hands in hers with the familiarity of decades of friendship, "look what has grown from the seeds you planted with your kindness. Our village has become a garden that feeds hope to communities throughout the region." The evening meal, shared around a simple wooden table that had witnessed countless conversations about dreams becoming reality, felt like communion between souls who had discovered that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in nictions forged through shared struggle and mutual care. As stars emerged over Khemenu, Pharaoh Khaemwaset reflected on a reign that had proved divine authority could serve divine compassion without sacrificing strength or stability. The memory stone stood silhouetted against the night sky, its presence promising that future generations would remember how one girl's desperate love for her mother had taught an empire that mercy was not weakness, but the highest expression of true power.